Hey, my name is Brent here on Cloudy with a Chance of Meeples. Today we're checking out a roll and build, the world's first roll and build, or that's what medieval age is known as. Instead of a roll and write where you're rolling dice and drawing things, this is you're rolling dice, you're resolving them, and then building your own medieval domain with walls and keeps and cathedrals and houses and all sorts of things. How does it play? What are my thoughts? Let's find out. Cue the thunder. So the radar overview for Era Medieval Age looks something like this. Here we have a roll and build game. In this game you'll be gaining dice throughout the game, and you'll be rolling them and then using the resources that you collect to build different things like hospitals and like guild halls, also monasteries and churches. Very cool little plastic pieces. You'll also be building some farms and houses and just tons and tons of amazingly good plastic pieces, all these wall pieces. Every game will feel very, very different. As you start the game, you can build it however you want. I just set it up just for example, how you can set it up. The keep always has to be in the middle, and you start the game with three of these longhouses represented by these yellow dice. Each of these keeps is represented by a noble dice. So how does this game work? Well, there's 6 phases in this game, and the first few are done all simultaneously. So every player would gain one of these player shields. They put it in front of them, and then they would roll these dice, and then they would resolve these. You can roll, and then you can roll up to a maximum of 2 rerolls. So on these peasant dice, you have rocks, you also have lumber, you have wheat, and you have some build actions, and then you have some disaster ones as well. So let's just say I didn't like any of those, and I'm just going to reroll them all, and I'm going to keep those resources and roll this. Well, for example's sake, let's imagine that I rolled one of the skulls. Anytime you roll a skull, you can never re-roll it unless you've built a church and you have then gotten a white die and a feather, then you have the chance to re-roll that. But most of the time, you'll never be able to re-roll any die with a skull. So after everybody's rolled, you would then remove your player shield, and then everybody would move to the collect phase. At that point, you would just resolve each of the dice. So this 3 wheat, I just move up on that track. This one will give me two stone. This one would gain me 1 lumber, as well as a build action, and then also 1 skull. So after everybody's resolved those, then you move this down. One player would be the active player, kind of running this each round. Everybody would have to feed. At that point, you must feed each one of your peasants represented by these yellow dice. So here I have 3, so then I would need to feed 1 per house, and then that will move down. I should also add the farm will gain me 1 wheat every round as well during the collect phase. So after everybody's done the collect phase, then you move to the disaster phase. Starting with the starting player, you then resolve how many skulls that you have rolled. If you roll 1, that's pretty bad because you have to take 1 disaster point or you lose 1 resource. So in this case, you know what? Let's just lose 1 wheat. So that would be the 1. Let's say I would have rolled 2. That is a disease, and then you have to move 1 disaster point for every clustered building. So in this case, I have 3 buildings, but none of them are clustered. Let's say my board looked like this, and that would happen. That would be devastating because you would lose a ton of points. If you ever roll 3 skulls, that's actually not that bad for you. It's bad for everybody else. Each one of your opponents would then be given 1 of these scorched land tiles. At that point, that player has to put it somewhere on their board. If there's ever a spot where they cannot do that because buildings are in the way, at that point, then you have to remove the buildings to put the scorched land tile. If you roll 4 skulls, that's bad then for yourself, because you must then lose a building and it comes out of the game. But if you roll 5, that is good for you, bad for others. You would then attack, and all opponents would have to lose an unwalled building. And then finally, if you roll 6 or more, that's bad for you because you lose all of your trade goods. And what do you need trade goods for? Well, after everybody has resolved their disaster die, then you can move to the build phase. At that point, depending on how many hammers you have, will show you how many things you can build. So, that's 1. If I would have rolled that, I'd be able to build a total of 3 things. At that point, then you can build different things. So, as you see, we already have some walls. You have some longhouses and a keep. Well, there's lots of different buildings you can build. You could build a university. It costs you a lot. 3 wood, 3 stone, and 3 trade goods. Gives you 4 victory points, and also 1 victory point for every culture at the end. So this is the culture track, and you'll be gaining culture if you have some of these white dice and some of these blue ones. And you will gain those by building churches as well as townhouses. You could also build a market. You could also build a hospital, which are really good, because if you're building a hospital and all of a sudden you roll 2 skulls, then the hospital, really good effect. All adjacent buildings are immune to disease. So then if you'd ever roll 2 of these skulls, then any building touching the hospital in that cluster would be canceled out. They'd be immune. So that would be fantastic. So there are tons and tons of different things that you can build. And, some of the better ones, they give you more endgame scoring. They'll cost you trade goods. That's what this top one is. So after you've built, then it'll go around the circle. Everybody would build what they can. And then you'd move to the final phase, and that is the extort phase. At that point, you look at these gray noble dice, and then depending on how many of these swords, that will reflect on who you're going to extort. So if I rolled 2 and my opponent rolled 1, I would then tell them that they owe me a resource. So at that point, they would look at their resources and they'd say, okay, you could have 1 wood. So then I would move up 1 wood, they would move down 1 wood, and I would extort them. In a 4-player game, you could have more dice than all other 3 players, and so you could extort all 3 players and gain a bunch of resources. Those players who would have to give up resources could also say, I'm not giving you any resources, I'm instead going to take a disaster point. So they could decide to not give up resources and do disaster. So you just continue to go around playing round after round until 3 of the building types are gone. So depending on how many players are in the game will reflect on how many of these tokens. But in a 2-player game, after 2 hospitals are built, then this flips over, and after 1 university is built in a 2-player game, that one's flipped over. So 3 different building types. As soon as they are all gone, then that triggers the final round. The game would end, and you move into final scoring, which might look something like this. This, folks, is the losing domain in the last game that I just played. I decided to, I had a huge cluster of buildings, a small city all walled in, and I'll get to why you will want to build it all walled in momentarily. But yes, this was lots of disaster points, so not very good. You have this nice scoring card, and it shows you the victory points for all of them. This is where the walls come into play. If you completed a full city and everything's walled in, then all of your buildings will be worth double. I will also add, whenever you build a wall, they cost 1 stone, and it doesn't matter if it's a small wall or a big wall, they both just cost 1 stone. But this is how you do scoring. You just go through and mark down each of these things. At the end of the game, whoever has the most culture gets a bonus 5 points. Whoever has the largest walled city gets 10 points. You add it all together. You subtract how many disaster points you have, and then whoever has the most points would be the winner. And in this case, I definitely was not the winner. So that is how you play Era Medieval Age. On to the final forecast. So the final forecast for Era, Medieval Age. Matt Leacock designed this game back in, I believe, 2008. It's called Roll Through the Ages, Bronze Age, something like that. To be totally honest, I've never played that game. I saw Era a couple years ago. I was intrigued by it, much like many other people. When I first opened it up, I saw a ton of little miniature buildings and these like pegboards that reminded me of just old school, like a Racco board or something like that, like just that old school, game component, and had a ton of all these little different colored houses and shapes and all sorts of things. And it was pretty bland. Mine came with those black stickers that you put over top, which are really nice. And so components on this game are fantastic. This game is pretty much only plastic and dice. You have those player shields, but for the most part, you're getting a lot of plastic and high quality plastic to boot. How does this game play? Well, I think this is pretty simple. The first time I put this thing out on the table, me and my wife were playing, and she's like, Brent, I don't know if I can do this. This just looks like so overwhelming. And then you start playing it, and it's super, super simple. This could have been a roll and write game. They could have, had dice and had, just colored pencils in the box, and you would have to, just draw the different shapes or whatever. They could have easily done that, but they decided to, do one step up and do all these custom little plastic buildings, and they look fantastic. They snap in your board nice. I loved every game that I played where you're just monkeying around. How are you going to build your city? Are you going to build it really close together and take a chance that you're not going to roll just two skull on the disaster track, so you don't have to deal with clustered buildings? Or are you going to spread it out and get a hospital? Maybe you can be lucky and get two of the hospitals in a game. And just how big are you going to build your domain before you start closing it off? Because it's kind of that race, that push and pull of watching everybody else and kind of looking at what they're doing and kind of adjusting your strategy to what they're doing. Because if you're spreading out really big and someone's just kind of racing towards the end of the game, they're gonna most likely have a finished walled castle, get double points for everything. Mind you, they'll have less buildings. So it's just, I don't know, it's got that nice balance that push your luck. I love, building those little longhouses and getting tons of yellow dice and hopes that I can, gain lots of resources and then build a whole bunch of things. I love that. I love building multiple churches, and then you get those clergy dice in hopes that you can get the most culture. You tag that along with building a university and your culture's doubled. And just, I don't know, there's just so many cool buildings in this. I've just enjoyed all my plays. I am not very good at this game. I've won one time. I got not a good winning percentage in this game. But each time, I think that's what I love most about this game, is just each time trying something new. Being like, hey, how am I going to build it this time? What should I do this way? Where should I put these? And I don't know, it's just a lot of fun. And just overall, I had a blast playing Era Medieval Age. I think this is a really fun roll and build game. It looks bigger than it is. It's a pretty big box. But overall, I enjoyed my plays with this. And so I'm giving it an 80% chance of meeples. I will say this, I got it on a Black Friday deal. So I was pretty stoked for what I got, what I paid and what I got. This was like my bargain of the year because Black Friday sale was thumbs up for me. So Era, Medieval Age, 80% chance of meeples. My name is Brent. Check us out on Facebook, Cloudy with a Chance of Meeples. Remember, grab your umbrella. The forecast is cloudy with a chance of meeples.